This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Welcome to StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. My guest today, Norman Steinberg, is one of the single best writers of comedy in the history of the genre. Norman's work has been recognized with an Emmy Award, a Writers Guild Award, and a British Academy Award nomination. He's written or co-written screenplays for numerous films, including some of the greatest movie comedies of all time, including, listen to this, My Favorite Year, Johnny Dangerously, Mr. Mom, and a little movie called Blazing Saddles, on which Norman worked with no less than comedy legends like Mel Brooks, Richard Pryor, and Andrew Bergman. For TV, he has served as a writer, creator, showrunner, and executive producer, leaving his mark on such programs as Cosby, When Things Were Rotten, Dr. Doctor, and Showtime's Paradise. Norman is currently at work writing 2 musicals, Johnny Dangerously the Musical and School for Scandal the Musical. He's been a teacher for many years. He's taught writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University and at the American Film Institute, and he created Long Island University's acclaimed TV Writers Studio, which is a one-of-a-kind writing practicum, the goal of which is to educate and to develop highly skilled, experienced professionals with strong portfolios who will be prepared to begin careers in the television industry as writer-producer entrepreneurs. A graduate of the University of Maryland and the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, Norman also was a practicing attorney specializing in entertainment and copyright law. No less than Mel Brooks said this, quote, Norman Steinberg is not only one of the most gifted co-writers I have ever worked with, but he also has been my dear friend since we did Blazing Saddles together 300 years ago. I cherish both his talent and his friendship, close quote. And for those reasons and many more, I'm thrilled beyond words to have the master of comedy himself, Norman Steinberg, on StoryBeat today. Norman, my friend, welcome to the show.
Well, I can't follow that introduction.
We're done. That's it. The show's over.
Okay. I'm finished. I'm all aglow.
I've wrung you out.
Yeah.
So let's
just nothing left to say.
Let's do a little bit of history on you. What were your earliest inspirations and influences? What was your first creative love, and what brought you to writing comedy?
You know, I was frightened at first, and I'm sure this is it's such a different time. See, I'm an old guy now. And I don't feel old, but I am old.
You're the youngest old guy I know.
Yeah. I mean, when I started, it was a mystery. It was a mystery. How is this done? How did we watch these things? And I have this rule where I tell this to writers, and I said, when you're watching something, and I did a lecture, and how loose are your standards here? Can I do a little scatology?
You may. We have an adult rating.
Okay, good. So it just I gave a lecture. They asked me to talk to some students, and my inspiration initially was, and I think so many other people. And this was a quote. This was the topic of my lecture: was who wrote this shit? Because I would watch stuff, and on television, comedy especially, and say, who wrote this shit? And I can do better than that.
Sure.
However, I did not try my hand. I did a few little things, but it wasn't. It was such a mystery to me, and it seemed to me, and I still feel this way, that writing is a calling, and it has become a job, which is, I think, kind of sad. The ubiquity of it. I mean, that when I was starting, the only film schools were probably USC, UCLA, and NYU.
Yeah, that's right.
And at that point, NYU had a few interesting people there, like Marty Scorsese,
yes,
and Robert De Niro, and Brian De Palma,
yes,
run by a legendary character named Haig Manoogian.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the start of it. Today, everyone has the feeling they can be a writer, and which is the good news. But 86% of them, no, 94% of them, are never gonna be able to do it. It's a spark, it's an inspiration, but it for me it was a leap, and I had to. I really felt, you have to be something special to do this.
And you got to have drive. You got to have ambition.
Yes, and this is, you must. Well, we'll get to that later, but I really feel that it's not a job, and there are jobs in show business. There was a famous producer named Josephine Levine.
Mm-hmm.
Who did The Graduate and
right.
D-Day and big pictures, and also Steve Reeves' crazy pictures.
Hercules movies.
Yeah. And he said everybody has two businesses, their own and show business. And he's right. Who doesn't love show business? I mean, really. It's just, what a great job.
And once it gets in your blood, it does not come out easily.
What's that?
Once it gets into your blood, it does not come out of it very easily.
No. Unless you're in Hollywood, in Los Angeles.
And then they kick it out of you.
Where everybody is in show business.
That's true.
Especially dentists.
And waiters.
Yes. There was a play, I'm blanking on the author, but it was called Eastern Standard.
Huh, I don't know that play.
Richard Nelson. At any rate, two people sitting in a restaurant in Los Angeles, and waves to the waiter and says, "Actor." And it's so true. Everybody's beautiful. I tell my students, you're not going to be summoned to Los Angeles.
No.
Arrive at LAX.
No.
And be greeted by someone who's going to take your hand and direct you to a Mercedes Maybach and get in, and there's going to be a beautiful man or woman, your choice, in the seat. It ain't going to happen.
There's no welcome committee in Hollywood, and there's no place to go to sign up for show business.
No, they're just people wanting to, if you're out there to become a writer, wanting you to die.
So you were a lawyer for a period of time. When did you start to write? When did you start to write and know you were good enough to even think about doing it as a living?
But you come to a point, and I said you got to make the leap, and you come to a point where, and we'll get to this later. I think that the existential question that everyone must ask him or herself is, what do I want to be when I grow up?
Mm-hmm.
And that entails a lot of things, but it's a big question, and the sooner you can answer it, the better you'll be. The focus is so important, and I think that for me, I went through 3 years of law school in Pittsburgh.
Right.
Before, when our classes were in the Cathedral of Learning, and there was not a separate law school, which sadly is built on the spot where Forbes Field was.
Hallowed ground. Yeah, it's built on. Yes, hallowed ground. That's correct.
Yeah, and it's so I graduated in the first year of law school. First of all, I took. Here's an interesting thing that people should know: when you take these SAT tests, which the part of that is the word aptitude. And I took the law school aptitude test, and I was on the rock bottom of that test, and I couldn't. I applied to some schools, and nobody. They saw the test and they said, "Take it again." And I took it again, and I did worse. And then, of course, the University of Pittsburgh then gave me a scholarship. And so I'm forever grateful or angry with them. I don't know which. But I had I did 3 years at Pitt, and it was wonderful 3 years, except for the fact that my father passed away in my freshman year. Oh. And I was ready to just leave. And if it had been in this environment, this time of life that we're in now in the 21st century, I would have left. But I thought, no, I have to do this for my father. Mm-hmm. And I did. And I finished. And by the way, it was on law review. So the aptitude test didn't tell me anything of how I was a good student, and I worked my ass off, and I got great grades. But did I have an aptitude for it? Should I have been a lawyer? No. But I was first of all a Jew who had to have something to fall back on. And
that was comedy.
So I have a degree, and I did. So if I had to fall back on my law degree, on my law profession, yes. I would hurt myself. I would hit my head.
Well, were you writing comedy when you were in law school?
No, there was no time. There was no time to write comedy.
When did you start doing that? When did you start writing comedy? What got you doing it?
I then came out of law school. It was also a time of the Vietnam War, so I was drafted. I was going to be drafted, and a law school buddy of mine named Stu Barman, who's a famous divorce attorney in Pittsburgh, he and I went into the Army, into the Army Reserve. We got into a unit in Pittsburgh, and off we went to Columbia, South Carolina. And I was so stupid that I had packed some sport jackets to go to the Army. And we arrived in Columbia, South Carolina, and realized, we are in trouble. And we had to get rid of this suitcase. And I never saw that suitcase again until I got out of the Army. But we checked into a hotel. And it wasn't until I went to, I got a job as a lawyer in entertainment law. That's as close as I could get to entertainment.
Right.
And I was and I moved back to New York, and that's where it started. And it was a golden age of comedy, in that Woody Allen was starting, and
50s?
Bill Cosby, and George Carlin, who, by the way, was my writing partner later.
Is that right?
On the Flip Wilson show. and it was just, I was on the outside looking in, and I wanted that, and I went to. There were no stand-up comedy clubs to speak of at that time, but I went to these places, and I saw these comics, and I listened to the 2,000-Year-Old Man.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I wanted in my heart of hearts. I was from Brooklyn, and I think there's something. I truly believe there's something in the water here that makes. There's so many great comedians have come out of Brooklyn,
mm-hmm.
and the Catskills and the Bronx, and it's just there's something about New York, and it's just from my neighborhood. There's there are thousands of comics who grew up here.
And it's
American comedy.
It's that the rough elbows of New York, I think, certainly contribute to it.
Well, that's the rub I have against, to use that word, against Los Angeles. What's great about New York is that you are banging into people, and you are seeing there is life in front of you, and that was a great school. A great school of learning about humanity and all the different flavors of life. And there's nothing. Well, you've been to New York, you know what it is.
Oh yes.
And you didn't even have that in Pittsburgh. It was door to door traffic. I mean, you were in a car, or when I was there was still trolley cars.
We had to do.
My father went to work. He worked in a department store in downtown Pittsburgh called Frank and Cedar,
mm-hmm.
and he got on a streetcar because he grew up in Brooklyn, came from Russia, grew up in Brooklyn, and didn't drive until he was in his 50s.
Oh wow!
So Pittsburgh was fine. I mean, New York, obviously, you didn't need a car.
No.
But in Pittsburgh, you could get away with it as well. We never had a car until we moved to Baltimore in like 1955.
So let's get into your career a little bit. What was your very first professional job as a writer? What was the first thing that you got hired to be? You're a writer.
The first thing I got hired to do was a comedy album. And I had quit being a lawyer, and we can get into that story later. But and I started writing. I figured I'm going to write for the Tonight Show. So I started writing monologues, and I had there's so much of this is fate, and also how annoying you can be to somebody. How much do you want this? And I really wanted it. I quit being a lawyer. I had no job, nothing except a dream, and I started writing comedy. And what transpired was I wrote, and here's, I mean, you never know where this is going to come from. I was in a reserve unit on 42nd Street is where we met. And there was a guy in the reserve unit who said, oh, my cousin's an agent. So, would he look at some of this material I wrote?
You were writing spec material.
Yeah, I was writing for the Tonight Show.
Got it.
I was writing for two things. One, I wanted to be S.J. Perlman, so I was writing humorous pieces that I was sure the New Yorker was going to print. They weren't so sure. So I was sending stuff out to magazines, and that's where you made a living. The first thing my first year as a writer, I got one job. It was writing a review of a film starring Albert Finney and Liza Minnelli, called Charlie Bubbles.
Charlie Bubbles.
And I got $50.
The immortal Charlie Bubbles.
Yeah. Had you ever seen it?
No, I've never heard of it.
It's actually a very good film. And he plays a writer from who becomes very famous and goes back to his home in the north of England. So I wrote this review, and it appeared in a magazine called I Magazine, EYE.
Right.
It's a Hearst magazine.
Right.
And what that did for me was it put my name in print. And that was my first year. I filed an income tax of $50.
Ooh, wow.
And I just thought, the guys at the IRS was saying, hey, look at this. Look at this guy. He made $50 last year. So, but boy, it was the world to me. And I started writing comedy material, and this guy in my reserve unit showed it to his cousin, who was an agent at the William Morris Agency.
Right.
And actually was Bill Cosby's agent.
Is that right?
It's a guy named Marty Litke, who recently passed away. But he responded to this material. I wrote a couple of monologues for Johnny Carson. He responded to this material. And actually, the first job he got me was writing for a stand-up comic named Marvin Braverman.
Marvin Braverman.
Yes.
Was he also
minutes.
in Charlie Bubbles?
Not in Charlie. These are all. Marvin Braverman was in an improv troupe that played the Improv in New York, the famous Improv.
Sure.
And called the New York Stickball Company, and I wrote 6 minutes for $600. Actually, I gave him about 15 minutes. I just kept writing, and I don't know if he ever did it, but I'll tell you this: he didn't pay me. He paid me $300, and but it just primed my pump, and then I started writing for monologues, spec monologues for the Tonight Show. Johnny Carson was in New York.
What year was this, Norman?
This was 1967, 8.
67, 68.
Yeah, 67, end of 67, 68. And I spent a lot of time down at the Improv, and everybody was down there. And the star at the time was Robert Klein, and Andy Kaufman was just starting, and Bette Midler would come there every night after she did Fiddler on the Roof, and it was a great place. And I also had this feeling that I was going to be having seen Woody Allen perform, and I didn't know who the hell he was, but he was. I saw him in the Village, and I remember his routines, and he was brilliant. He was brilliant, and it's on his first comedy album. And I mean, there were great lines. I went to a catered funeral. They had a replica of the deceased in potato salad. My ex-wife was caught having sex in a parked car, and I knew it wasn't a moving violation. I mean, there was just some great jokes, and he took an exam in his philosophy class and was thrown out of the class because he looked within the soul of the person next to him. No, it was just a brilliant material, and I said, I want to do that. And so this agent got me first 6 minutes of material, for $600. I tell you, if I saw Marvin Brauman today, this is how many years later? 50 years later, he would say, "I'm going to get you that $300, man." I know he's so guilty about that. He's a very sweet guy and a very funny guy.
I'm sure there'd be no interest on it at this point.
No, none. At any rate, that was, and then the agent called me and he said, "There's a guy who wants to talk to you, and his name is Gary Belkin."
Okay.
And Gary Belkin was a writer who had been on the very famous Your Show of Shows.
Sure.
We all know what that is.
Of course, Sid Caesar.
So, it had the greatest lineup of comedy writers known to mankind.
Tell us who they were. Tell us who
it was Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner and Larry Gelbart and Neil Simon and Danny Simon and Gary Belkin and Woody Allen.
Is that all?
It was, and it starred Sid Caesar. It was astonishing.
Just a couple of little guys.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And Gary had written for that show, among others, and he hired me for $500 to write on a comedy album. And the comedy album was for an impressionist, and we're not talking about Monet. We're talking about a guy who did comedy impressions, and named David Fry.
David Fry.
And
Richard Nixon.
David Fry could do anyone, and he did a spectacular Nixon, and he did LBJ, and he did William Buckley, and all of those people who were anybody who was singular at that time, he did them. And we were going to do a political album as Lyndon Johnson was leaving the White House and Richard Nixon was coming into the White House.
Right.
So that was it was called "I Am the President."
It's a famous recording.
Yeah.
It's a very famous recording.
This was my first job, and it got the Grammy Award.
Wow.
And that was unbelievable. We recorded it and had all these great actors, these sketch actors from New York do the different characters, and David Fry did everyone. He did Nixon and Johnson and William Buckley. I mean, he was uncanny. He was also a guy who, that, like so many impressionists, you see all these things. And Sid Caesar was one of them. May I say that he had so many different faces and so many different voices.
Characters.
That he had none. He had none of his own. He had no personality.
Interesting.
And so David Fry was a blank slate. He was a cipher.
So was Peter Sellers. Same way.
Same way. Yeah, but even crazier.
Well, yes.
Even crazier, but an absolute genius.
Oh,
and there was
amazing.
Caesar, genius.
Sure.
There was a famous story about at the Writers Guild in Los Angeles. They were honoring Sid and all the writers from Your Show of Shows who were still alive. And Gelbart was there, and Carl was there, and Mel, of course, and Neil Simon, and Danny Simon, and Sid Caesar. They all talked about Sid Caesar, what he had done, and how great he was, the greatest. And he was sitting there, and he was asked to speak, and he got up, and he was in failing health, but he got up to speak, and he was really tongue-tied, and couldn't really thank the audience until Mel Brooks leaned in and said to him, "Do it in German," Sid. And he was able to thank them as a German.
There you go. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, David Fry would go on the Tonight Show to beat the drum for the album, and then he didn't have anything to say. He was he had no persona.
So he was an amazing artist, but not a very good guest.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, as good as it gets. Way better than Rich Little, I have to say, or any of those other. Or John Byner is good too, but he was a thing apart. He really was. And then from there, same agent got me. It wasn't even the agent. It was, and this is how things happen, because when you're, and it maintains today, when you're a writer, and the most important thing, well, today it's called networking.
Yes.
The most important thing is to cultivate these relationships. Gary Belkin then gave me my second job.
Connections. It's all about connections.
Oh, yes, it was. And it's all about, it is that. And this second job was on a show called Comedy Tonight. It was a summer replacement, and it starred Robert Klein.
Mm-hmm.
And it also had Peter Boyle, and the first time I ever worked with the delicious, wonderful, genius Madeline Kahn.
Mm-hmm.
And again, a bunch of New York actors who could do sketch work. It was a sketch show, and it was, and I'll tell you the next connection. It came from, it's fate, and this is how it happens. And the next connection was I did the second David Fry album, but it was in Los Angeles.
Right.
And I was in Los Angeles, and I was staying at a motel across from the Comedy Store on Sunset, and there was Robert Klein. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm doing the Flip Wilson show, and it's out in Burbank. Why don't you come and see the show tonight?" I said, "Okay, great." I go to see the show. He introduces me to the head writer, a guy named Herb Baker, and Herb Baker said, "Do you have any material?" And I said, "Yes." There was no internet, so I ran. The next day, I delivered a lot of material to him at NBC Burbank, and they hired me to do the Flip Wilson show.
You went back and typed it up on an actual typewriter?
No, I had it.
Oh, you had it.
It was, and I was, but I showed him sketches that I was writing for the new David Fry album called Radio Free Nixon.
Right.
And which was not a hit.
And
the first one was a major hit.
But the material was your spec work for him, right?
Yeah, but there it was. From Gary Belkin to Robert Klein to Flip Wilson, which became the #1 show on television.
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, and if anybody hadn't seen Flip Wilson, he was adorable. He was the first African-American host of a variety show, successful variety show. And we had everybody on that show, including Richard Pryor, which is another connection which happens soon thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody. There was Bing Crosby, was it? Jack Benny, Bill Cosby. Everyone wanted to do Flip.
Did you write for Geraldine?
Yes.
So the Geraldine's famous line.
Here's the other fortuitosity. They had Flip was very kind, also crazy, but kind.
Yes.
And George Carlin, he would hire George Carlin to come on the show because George was going through a divorce. He was a beer drunk and trying to shake that, and just didn't have any money. Flip offered him a job on the show, and because I didn't have a partner, we partnered up. And so George Carlin was my partner.
That's amazing.
And what a genius he was.
Oh, my goodness. I mean,
yeah. So this is, I mean, you can just follow the bouncing ball, and it maintains today, as I said, because when you become a writer, and in television especially, and not that it's not such an exclusive club, but writers are the best people on earth, and they are loyal as hell, and they will reach out to you, and they will help you, and Larry Gelbart once said, true success in Hollywood is seeing your best friend fail. And it's a quip, and it's not true. It's not true, because writers are great. Of course, there's Schadenfreude, and they don't want anybody to do better than you do. But
no, it's
if
competitive.
You work with people like Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, ain't gonna do better than they did, or Richard Pryor.
No.
But come on, or Bill Cosby.
No.
Well, you'll do better than he did in some respects.
Well, hopefully. I wanted to make sure the audience understands what the reference I said a moment ago when I said, did you write for Geraldine? Geraldine was Flip Wilson's famous character where he was in drag, dressed as a woman, and his famous line was, "The devil made me do it." And that was a catchphrase that was all over, the culture for quite some time.
He really started he never said talk to the hand, but in most respects he did. He said, you don't know me. And he was so adorable, and he had great legs, so he looked good in drag, and he was the African American woman who said, basically, talk to the hand.
Mm-hmm.
You can't bullshit me.
Mm-hmm.
I've been there. And he was audacious in that respect.
Well, think about that. 50 years ago, he was doing cross-dressing as a woman in comedy as an African-American man on American television, and people loved it. So that was very far ahead of its time.
Absolutely, and he was not a writer, but what he did was he bought a joke book, and he was doing stand-up, and he was so lovable that people just they hied to him. They just loved him, and that was his persona. Was this? He had a great smile and a great laugh. In real life, he was one of the loneliest people I've ever met.
Is that right?
Yeah, and he was not. You just couldn't get to him.
Not a happy
because
person.
Nobody knew who he was. I mean, again, he hid behind his characters, and he had a lot of characters. George Carlin and I wrote a character for him, which was he was the janitor in the Oval Office. He was the guy who cleaned up the Oval Office.
Mm-hmm. I remember this.
And what's his the guy from the Carol Burnett show?
Harvey Korman, Tim Conway.
No, Tim Conway. Tim Conway played the president, and we did sketches where the president was alone in the Oval Office, and Flip would come in cleaning up and basically tell the president how to run the country. It was great, and everybody wanted to be on that show.
Mm-hmm.
It was an unbelievable experience, and that led to an Emmy. The show won the first year, and I had my Emmy handed to me by Jimmy Durante.
Oh, wow.
Who was one of the greatest comedians of all time. Comedy actors. He's
a unique character.
Legendary. You can look him up.
A totally unique character.
Yes. And so we got the Emmy, and I was, listen, this was 1970, and I was making $750 a week.
That
which
much?
To me was a fortune.
Well, back then it was.
It was. I mean, it was great. And we were picked up, obviously, for the next year when I was going to be making $1,500 a week.
Wow.
Plus other money from the show. There were fees and reuse fees. You know, so it was a bonanza for me. And so in my typical fashion, I said, okay, I'm going to quit. and that's what I did. And the head writer, named Herb Baker, and I'm going to tell you about that name in a second. Herb Baker said to me, "Are you crazy? This is." I said, "No, I know. I have to go home. I had to come back to New York." And here's where fate kicks in. And I said, "I don't feel that I belong out here in Los Angeles."
You didn't like L.A.?
No, I didn't. No, it's impossible not to like L.A. because it's so easy. It's lush. It's aside from the fact that a mountain may fall on you, or your house may burn up in a forest fire.
Yes.
Aside from that, it just didn't. I felt like a displaced person, and I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be. This is a concept, and this is important to writers too. You should be home. Home is so important, and I see it with my students. And I tell them, stay in New York. You'll be better writers. You're going to end up. You'll go out to L.A. one way or another when your career starts, but stay in New York because just the friction of the city and the humanity here will make you a more rounded person.
Yes.
So, but I was born in Brooklyn, and I live in Brooklyn, and I love New York, and I was out there, and I just didn't feel right. My dear friend Andrew Bergman, who wrote the original draft of the original screenplay for Blazing Saddles, which was called Tex X.
Yeah, Tex X. Yeah.
And Andrew never left New York. And as I think back on it, well, listen, I have nothing to complain about. I have had a great time, and I think that I would have been even happier, and I'm pretty damn happy. Even happier had I just said, no, this is where I belong. But when I came, if I had not come back to New York, and when I came back to New York, if I was driving metaphorically from Los Angeles to New York, I would be driving to New York, and I would see the entire world of show business driving to Los Angeles.
Right.
Everything was happening out there, and I was going somewhere when nothing was happening, or it was drying up. Of course, there was always a theater, which we can talk about, but this is had I not gone back to New York, I would have not gotten Blazing Saddles.
So
what do you think of that?
I think it's amazing. Tell us that story. How did that happen?
So, came back to New York, and there was no work. I was doing bits and pieces here and there, what they called specials.
Right.
And Alan King, I worked for Alan King, a wonderful great vaudevillian comic actor, really a guy who loved writers, and picking up odd jobs. I once rewrote Comden and Green, believe it or not.
Really?
On a television special, but I was picking up work, and again, here comes Gary Belkin, who hired me to do what we called a special. It was a 1 hour. It's a one-off. Timex used to do these things, and they were shows. They were, and this one was called. They were variety shows. They had circus shows. I mean, they would just slot them in where, and it was a vehicle for advertisers.
Sure.
And this one was called Aquacade in Acapulco.
Oh my goodness!
and it was Gary Belkin was the head writer. It was a sketch show, and we go down to Acapulco and opened the Princess Hotel, which is now probably 50 years old, and we did a TV special there, and on this special was Stiller and Mirror, and Tony Randall, and Ed McMahon, and this group called the Aquamaniacs.
Oh, the Aquamaniacs.
Yeah. You remember them.
Oh, who
and a guy named Henry Lamoth, who dove into from 40 feet in the lobby of the Acapulco Princess into this fountain that was 40 inches deep.
Oof.
And he got $1,000 for one jump. 2,000 for two. You do the math. And special guest star Mel Brooks.
Wow.
So there was Mel, who, by the way, had done 2 films, The Producers and 12 Chairs.
Yeah.
And was broke.
That's
and
amazing.
Was doing this show for the money.
That's amazing.
And I got to spend, and Anne Bancroft was pregnant with their son, Max Brooks, who I just heard the other day on Fresh Air, a great podcast, who wrote the zombie books.
Yeah, World War Z.
Yeah, well, and the Zombie Survival Guide. And Max he's a genius. He's now in his 40s. So she was pregnant with Max, and we were all in Acapulco together. And I got to spend 10 days with Mel, and we made each other laugh. We made each other, and we missed the story of how I started, which was because of Mel Brooks. But he said to me, they sent me a screenplay, and I want you to read it and tell me if you think it's funny. And that screenplay was called Tex X.
Mm-hmm.
And I read the screenplay. He said, I'll see you when I get back to New York, when we all come back to New York. And I thought, I spent 10 days with my hero, my comedy hero, and his wife, and we had a great time laughing. And now he's asking me to read something for him, and I said I thought it was funny as hell, but it needed work, like anything needs work. And he said, "You want to do this?" He said, Warner Brothers wants to do a movie. And I said, okay.
How cool is that?
And that was the start of Blazing Saddle. Boy, by the way, let me also say Gary Belkin, who gave me, now my first 2 jobs and now this job. And I said to him one day, and this is great for writers, and I tell this to all my students for the last 10 years. I said to him, Gary, how can I ever repay you? And he said something that just gave me chills, and he said to me, and it was a game changer for me. He said, pass it on.
Yeah, great.
And I made a pledge to myself at that time. That's what I'm going to do. And that, so I would say I've started a couple of hundred careers, and that's it. There's a Yiddish word, it's called nachas. It gives you great joy, and that's, for me, was my nachas. It's really you know, Mel, I read this thing, and he said, come on, let's do it. He wanted to write it as Your Show of Shows had been written, which was in around the writer's table.
Mm-hmm.
And so we assembled. Andrew Bergman obviously was there, and I had a partner named Alan Uger who came in, but only lasted a week. And it was the four of us, me and Mel and Andrew and Alan Uger, in a room at which has now become famous or an infamous building called 666 Fifth Avenue.
Oh, really?
Which was where Warner Brothers was, and is now owned by Jared Kushner.
Jared Kushner, sure.
Yeah, and is underwater. So he's running around looking for money, from what I understand. But this is where we wrote it, and there were the four of us. And Mel looked around and said, "I'm looking at four white Jews, and we're writing a film about a black sheriff in the Old West.
Perfect.
We need a gentleman of color." And I said, well, I think the funniest guy anywhere is Richard Pryor, and I worked with him on Flip Wilson. I'll call him. He said, great. And I called Richie, and he was breathless. I mean, I just told him, yeah. And he couldn't even speak. He said, Mel, look. He was, he said, send me train fare. And so he showed up. And he lasted 3 weeks, but it was a golden 3 weeks.
I bet.
It was unbelievable. To have Mel Brooks and Richard Pryor in the same room, you know, that was incredible. Incredible. And what an experience.
I know from talking to you in the past about this, Norman, that you made a pact with everyone there that none of you say who wrote what, but I'm curious what kind of impact Richard Pryor's coming onto the project, how much impact did he have in the ultimate finished product?
Enormous.
Enormous.
An outsized impact, because what he pushed us to some absurdities. And we did a whole sequence, an animated sequence. There's only a piece of it left. And he wrote a lot of that, and we didn't. It was filmed, but it was not in the film. And he also he brought a sensibility, and I will tell you that I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, but he called it a prison songs, but it was rap. It was rap, and we hanged a lot of people, and there was one in Blazing Saddles. There was an executioner who was hanging people right outside Harvey Korman's window.
Right.
And it was this actor who did an impression of Boris Karloff, and they just had a group of people that they were hanging, and they were hanging a guy in a wheelchair. And, I mean, there were references. This is the Dr. Gillespie killings, which was there was a Dr. Gillespie in a wheelchair. I mean, from a television show. It was, and Richie came up with a lot of that stuff. But we were trying to. Cleavon Little was going to be hanged, and we were trying to vamp for time, and Richard came up with basically was a rap song. And I didn't know what it was, but he said it was something that he learned when he was in prison. And he once said to me as we were writing, and Richard would show up in costume every day. Someday he would come in dressed as a nurse. And it was so he just ignited the spirit in the room, and oh yeah, and not talking out of school. He was doing a lot of coke. It's the first time I ever had seen coke. I didn't know what the hell it was, but he was doing a lot of that. So he was flying, but he was phenomenal. And he came. He said to me one day. He said, "Listen, Norm. When you're in prison and you got to go to the shower, don't put no towel around you." I said, "Oh, okay. When I go to prison, I'll try to remember that." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because they'll think you're hiding something good." So, okay, Rich, I'm trying to remember that. But he was just great. I mean, and like my favorite year, the relationship. Mel assigned me to be his guardian, to make sure that he didn't do anything crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a lot of nights with him, and because he was doing so much coke, he was really kind of abusive to people, but just had to grab him by the arm and take him out of places. But to be with him, and everybody knew him, everybody loved him, and just a genius.
Was he
genius.
Was he on all the time comedically?
He worked. He wasn't. There are some people who are on, quote unquote, and are just performing. He was at heart a writer-performer, and you can see it in his stand-up. Some of the stuff is brilliant, just from an acting standpoint.
Oh, sure.
And
of course
I mean, he got an Oscar nomination, I think, for Lady Sings the Blues. He played Piano Man. I mean, he really was a good actor. So he wasn't. There were some people who are on who were just trying to get laughs, just trying to do shtick, just trying to joke. No, his was really intellectual. It was a comment on human behavior at all times because he had lived through so much. The guy was born in a whorehouse.
Yeah.
He had been through so much stuff. He came in one. He had it wasn't his wife. He brought this to my woman, as he called her, and I mean to show you the abusive behavior was she came and she would show up in the conference room where we were working, basically to get some money from him. And one day she showed up and she had a cast on her hand, and she left. And I said, "What was that about?" He said, "I punched her."
Oh.
I said, "You punched her in the hand?" Her hand was broken. And he said, "She put it in front of her face." I mean, without missing a beat. And that was sort of normal behavior.
Wow.
normal behavior under the influence.
So
but he was right out front with that. There was no.
All right, so there clearly were others of you in that particular writing room.
Yeah.
I assume that without question the leader of the room was Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
What you have obviously been the executive producer, and you've run rooms, writers' rooms, and so on. What was it about, or if there was, is there anything about the way that Mel Brooks runs a room that is unique or different or inspirational that others can take something from? Did he do things differently?
What's inspirational about the way he works is that, and mind you, he has a sense of himself.
Sure.
He knows what an iconic figure he is. Given that, if you want to use the term speaking truth to power,
mm-hmm.
It came down to the three of us, me and Mel and Andrew Bergman. And once Richard left, that was 3 weeks in, it was just me and Mel and Richie, and me and Mel and Andy for the next year, finishing the first draft and going to the second draft. So it was the three of us, and neither Andy nor I was afraid of him. And he appreciated that. And so he wasn't going to be, we weren't going to be cowed. And if we didn't like something, we fought for it. And he respected that. And that was, he could have said, shut up. This is, and you've probably seen it on shows and on collaborative ventures where there's what they call the final pencil,
sure.
the head writer, and he said, no, this is what we're doing. Mel was not like that. He would, if there was a better idea, and there was always a better idea, and there was always a bigger laugh, he'd go for it. He'd go for it, and that's why there was no authorship here. This was a true collaboration.
He wasn't protective of his material in a way some people
Not at all. Not at all. There was a character that we had in Blazing Saddles, which both Andy and I thought was grotesque. And the character was named Ashtray.
Ashtray.
Ashtray. Ashtray was a what they call a little person. He was a midget.
Yeah.
But he had an ashtray for a hat, and Harvey Korman would flick at his cigar, and Harvey Korman as the villain of the piece, Hedley Lamar.
Hedley.
And Ashtray appeared as an ashtray, and Harvey Korman said, "Ashtray, ashtray," and the ashtray disappeared from the table, and out came this midget. And Mel had seen this character. There was a group called the Harmonica Rascals.
Okay.
And the lead rascal was a guy named Johnny Paleo.
Johnny Paleo,
who was a midget,
and the Harmonica
and he
Cats.
was nasty.
Norman,
and he would bite people on the ankle, and he was just an abusive guy.
That was the Harmonica.
And our ashtray.
That was the Harmonica Cats.
There were two. There were Harmonica Cats and the Harmonica Rascals.
And Paleo was the Rascals, not the Harmonica Cats?
I think he was both.
Oh.
At any rate, our guy, our ashtray, had a wooden neck because he had been hanged and he didn't die. And so he couldn't speak, but he communicated to the world by knocking on his neck.
Oh.
And it was just... And he would bite people, and it was just too bad. And Mel really held on to this, and we would walk home literally from Fifth Avenue and 52nd Street, or 54th Street down to the Village. I lived in the East Village. He lived in the West Village. Andy Bergman lived in between in Gramercy Park. And we would talk about characters. We'd we'd go out to dinner every night, and that's it. I mean, this was a symbiotic, and I would say to him, "What? Why do we have to do? It's a terrible character. This is a terrible. Let's get rid." And finally, one day, he said, "All right, he's out. He's out." So, he said, why'd you hold on to it so long? I want to win. But he gave it. He knew it was wrong, and he knew it would have been cut. And there was a great line, and which I, to this day, don't understand. Probably, I think maybe the funniest line in the film, which he refused to put in the film, in the scene, because it was a little off-color, way off-color for the times. Madeline Kahn is in the room, as she's Lily von Stubb.
Yes.
And the sheriff is in the room with her, the African-American sheriff. And it's in the dark, and you hear a zip.
Mm-hmm.
Or you hear, she says, "Is it true
yeah.
what they say about how you people are gifted?"
Oh.
And you hear a zip, and Cleavon Little plays it, and you hear her say, "Oh, it's true. Oh, it's true. It's true." And then Cleavon says to her, "Excuse me, Miss von Stubb, but you're sucking my arm." And it would have been a huge laugh. A huge laugh. Or we went, "You're biting my arm, you're licking my arm." He would not put that in.
Wow.
And, then we're talking about a film with farts and all kinds of... and I think people, the biggest laugh that people talk about is Alex Karras punching out a horse.
Yeah, sure. Oh,
yeah, but
that
this one was sort of a dirty joke, and it wouldn't. I mean, we got everything else. The N word, I mean, this was, and Richard Pryor gave us that license as well.
I don't think you could get away with that movie today. Do you?
Well, I think that Tarantino didn't he?
But not in a comedy.
Well, it was sort of a comedy,
which?
Wasn't it?
Pulp Fiction?
Huh?
Pulp Fiction?
No.
Which?
What's it? The one with about slavery.
Oh, Django Unchained?
Yeah, Django Unchained. There was the N-word all over that.
Yeah,
and there were, people riding. We stole a joke from us of people riding around in hoods. So I can't see anything. Remember that?
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and the N-word was all over that thing.
Yeah, I bet you.
And it was sort of a hybrid. It had comedic moments and deeply troubling moments.
Maybe you're right. I just think it would be very hard to get that Blazing Saddles produced today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And unless maybe it was a black filmmaker.
Correct. Perhaps if it was an African-American filmmaker, there might be an ability to do it, but I think the studios would still be very reluctant today about it.
Yeah, if you look at
different times.
What's his name? Dave, the comedian.
Dave Chappelle.
It's all over the place.
Dave Chappelle.
Chappelle, yeah. His the N-word's all over his act.
Sure.
And Chris Rock too. They're both as good as it gets in comedy and stand-up.
There's
comedy.
nobody funnier in comedy than those two. That is for sure.
Yeah. No,
So let's talk for a minute about Johnny Dangerously, which I think is an amazing movie. How did that come about?
Well, there was a guy at the screening. First of all, when we screened Blazing Saddles for the executives,
mm-hmm.
There was Mel came back to the office. We were in L.A. at the time. came back to the office. He was ashen. And he said, I showed them the film. And this, by the way, is the same film as out there 40 years later.
Right.
And they didn't laugh once.
Oh, boy.
And he said, I'm recutting the film. And both the producer, Michael Hertzberg, and I pushed him against the wall and said, no, you're not. Again, this was, he could have just said, the hell with you, get away, get out of my, this is my film, not yours. But he didn't. He listened. I said, we're having a screening tonight for the secretaries at Warner Brothers, and let's see their reaction. Well, they bounced off the walls. I mean, it was a standing ovation. Mm-hmm. They had never seen anything like this. It was uproarious, and Mel got up at the end. At the beginning, he said, we want to see how you react, and this is a film we've done. You got to watch out because there's things in this film that you've never seen before, and they went batshit. And at the end of the screening, and he said, your bosses didn't laugh once. And you know what? Fuck them. And that was it. That was it. But he was backed by John Calley, who was the head of the studio, and he, even though the other executives were scared of it. And by the way, the film only cost $2.2 million.
Wow.
And he said, John Calley said to him, Mel, you've gone up to the bell, ring it. And that gave him license. That gave him license. And that film went out and surprised everybody. But to get to, there was a guy in the audience named Bud Austin, who's now departed, a wonderful man, and he was the head of Paramount Television. And he said, he called me. I met him at the screening, and he said, he offered me a job. And he said, come to Paramount. I'll fly. We'll bring you out here. You can. I want you to be the head of comedy development. I had the last job I had was as a lawyer. They flew me out there. They gave me this job. I said, but I want to write. He said, well, you can write too. That's over and above your salary. So, I mean, this was like a dream. And I was the head of comedy development. I only stayed for 1 year because I developed a television show with Mel called When Things Were Rotten, and I went on to produce that. At any rate, when I went to work at Paramount in television, he said to me, Blazing Saddles is my favorite comedy of all time. Why don't we do Blazing Tommy Guns?
Okay.
So, do a crazy comedy, but set in like a Jimmy Cagney film.
Gangster movie.
And what's that?
A gangster movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I said, why not? And I assembled a group. The same kind of theory as Mel. I assembled a group, a team called Kukoff and Harris, and Harry Colombi, who was a writer and also a manager, and oddly enough, managed Michael Keaton. So,
that's fortuitous.
And John Biner, and at one point in his career had managed Thelonious Monk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. At any rate, so the four of us got together and outlined this film, and we did an outline, a beat sheet, from top to bottom. It took us, I think, 12 days to outline the film. Then we split it down the middle we knew every beat of this film, where we were going with it. We split it down the middle, and Kukoff and Harris wrote a half, and Harry and I wrote a half, and then it changed halves, and then we had a film in about a month, and that was the film that we went. And it was tough getting it made, but we put together a team of Michael. Well, Michael Keaton, I had done Mr. Mom with Michael, and before that he had done this other film with Ron Howard. So he was an up-and-coming comedy star.
Right. And
Mr. Mom was, to me, when I did Mr. Mom, I rewrote Mr. Mom. John Hughes had written the first draft, and it was sort of nasty. And I rewrote the film in 3 weeks, and I thought it was sort of a movie of the week. But that film is, they love this film. This is a beloved film. And Michael, obviously, other than Batman, that was an enormously successful film. So we had Michael, who was a star, and we hired Amy Heckerling, who
Fast Times at Ridgemont
High.
Right.
And she was great. And it was the send up of it was a gangster film, and it was flat out fun. It was.
So how did you develop in Johnny Dangerously? How did you go about forming all these oddball words? Farging, ice hole, and stuff like that. How did you? How did that develop?
Well, that's what came up. We outlined it, and we had this character named Roman Moroni. And by the way, we got a cease and desist order, which from the Mormon Church.
Because of Moroni.
Because this Moroni, he's a saint of the Mormon Church.
Right,
I didn't know
exactly.
that. But we kept the name. We said they lost that battle. Fox, they said you can't use that name. And yeah, really? So, and Moroni was played by a brilliant actor named Richard Dimitri. Mm-hmm. And by the way, there's in South Dakota. There's a hockey team called the Farging Ice Holes. And I would give total credit to Jeff Harris and Bernie Kukoff. They came up with that lingo, which I thought was hilarious.
That is hilarious. It's
great.
It's a big part. It's a big part of why people remember the movie, because those things stand out so brilliantly.
Oh yeah. That's Jeff Harris has departed, but Bernie's still around and become sort of a poet. I mean, it was fast, bang bang. I mean, we got it done, we got it made, and I don't think that it really retains a lot of interest on the. A lot of people love this film, and they repeat lines from it, but it was never a blockbuster hit. Didn't make the money it should have made. Blazing Saddles did, but this in those dollars, it made $100 million back in 45 years ago, when $100 million was something.
Yeah, that was
not
a huge
chump
number.
change,
right?
Like it is today.
Right.
But it was Johnny Dangerously should have should have been a bigger hit. I don't know why it wasn't more popular, because I think I've been in audiences, they love this film. And there's so many. Dom DeLuise as the Pope. It was, we really, and Peter Boyle was great. And just maybe I think the score could have been better. And
well, I think it's become a cult classic. I think it's become one of those movies that's beloved and people watch it over and over again. I'm sure it's done okay on DVD and on cable and so on. And it's become a cult classic. Well, Norman, we've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes, if you can believe that, and I've barely scratched the surface with you, and I'm wondering if maybe we can do a second episode at some point.
Why not?
Well, so I'm going to ask you the two questions I like to ask all of my guests, and we'll wrap it up with that. So you've told us all these incredible stories, but is there one particular story that you have that's oddball, quirky, hilariously funny, something people may not know that you can share?
Well, I don't. Once you say hilariously funny, boy, you got to. That's a mountain to climb.
Okay, so just quirky.
I tell you what, I used to live. I was between girlfriends. I had. She was my girlfriend. I went. I had broken up with a woman who was an actress, who was very sweet, who was in the original True Grit.
Oh, Kim Darby?
Yeah, she was my girlfriend.
Wow.
And we broke up. I had nowhere, and I had just bought a house, but I couldn't move into it. And so I ended up living with Marty and Loretta Feldman.
Oh, wow. What was that like? Holy moly!
They were great friends, and they had a guest house on their property. So I lived in their guest house, and I would get up some mornings, and Marty he would come over from the house, and he'd come to my closet. And he would take, because we were the same size, he would just pick from my clothing. And it was, and he would tell people, "I'm dressed by Steinberg of Hollywood." And then we went to France together, to the south of France, and then afterwards. We spent some time, the three of us, in the south of France, and then he was going back to London to do Sherlock Holmes' smarter brother.
Right.
And he was, we were living somewhere in Hampstead, and they rented a house, and I didn't know where I was, but the first night back, Loretta takes me out to, and Marty had to get up early, so he takes me out to a club owned by Annie Ross, and I don't know if you know who that is.
No.
But Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross.
Oh,
a
okay.
Great trio.
Yeah.
And she's also an actress. And we go to her club, and they had a driver, and so Loretta and the driver are drinking and smoking, and I don't know where I am, and I said, "Can't we just go home? I'm falling asleep." So we didn't get out of there till about 6:30 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
And the next day, and I went home. They took me home, went to sleep. Next day, I said to Marty, I couldn't get them to leave. And he said, when Loretta gets like that, she won't leave. So you must amputate the room.
Oh, I loved Marty Feldman. I still love
What?
Marty Feldman. I love Marty Feldman. He's
Well, he said he was brilliant. He was really brilliant. And he said something else. He did a summer replacement show, actually written by Larry Gelbart and Barry Levinson. It's a brilliant sketch show.
I remember seeing that show. Oh, it's just great.
Get a hold of it.
Yeah.
What's that?
I say it's great. I remember seeing it when it was on. It was great.
It was wonderful. And the producer was a summer replacement for Dean Martin. And Dean Martin's show was produced by a guy named Greg Garrison, who was, I think, he actually had a Ferrari dealership, and then he became a producer. But he did the Dean Martin show, which is a big hit. And Marty Feldman, he produced the Marty Feldman show, too. Marty Feldman said, Greg Garrison is the sort of producer who gives you the fuck, but he keeps the orgasm. Which I love. He was a quipper.
Oh.
So that.
So okay. Well, that caps that. Do you have in your repertoire? Do you have one solid piece of advice or a tip to give to those who are starting out in the business or trying to make success out of their careers that can help them along their way?
Absolutely. See, listen. I like I said before. Ask yourself that existential question of what do I want to be when I grow up, and if you want to be a writer, then you must have the requisite talent, and that's God-given. It can be developed, but this has to be the spark. You have to have somebody has to see it that this person can do it. And I tell people, like, anybody who tells you that they can teach you how to write is bullshitting you.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible. Nobody can teach you how to write. What I can do and what my program can do is teach you how to be a writer. Like you said, it's a practicum. So I can teach that. I can show you the ropes. But what you have to do is have that. If once we determine, and you determine you have the talent, you need 3 P's. Patience, because it ain't going to happen that fast. Perseverance, but most of all, passion. And if you say, I'm going to do this, and I said that to myself, and it paid off. I have to do this to save my life. I must do this, and that's the passion that you have to. You just have to keep igniting in yourself, and you have to have the work ethic. You must have a work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
Because people are nobody. There's no free passes here.
No.
And you will get found out. So, passion, talent, and passion, and then just pull the ripcord. Go for it.
Well, the 3 Ps, those are very important and vital: perseverance, patience, and passion. And those 3, if you don't have those, you really shouldn't even think about being in the business. And I agree with you that, and I teach my students all the time. It's I can't give you talent. All we can do as educators is hopefully push talented people toward making themselves be better, and to showing them where perhaps the error of their ways are, or how they can improve things. But they have to go out and do the work.
Yeah. You also have to tell them the truth. And what a lot of my students find out is that, you know what, I love what this, and when I go out and recruit people, I say, I'm not selling you a program, I am selling you a life.
Mm-hmm.
And what they in the 2 years they're in the program, a lot of them find out that, you know what, I love producing. I can do that. I love casting. I'd really like to do, not that we could ever teach production design, but, this is, the exposure that you get. You can have a life in this industry in many ways, and a meaningful life.
Absolutely.
And the same P's maintained. I mean, you just got to stay the course and taste it. You have to keep tasting it. I want this. I want this. This is who I am. This is how I'm going to define myself in life.
Well, Norman, this has been an amazing hour and a half. That I could go for another couple hours here easily, I'm sure. And I'm just deeply grateful to you.
Oh, yeah, we haven't talked about the theater yet, have we?
We have not. That's why I'm
saying.
I'm
having the best time. I want to grow up to be Steve Cuden.
Well,
Cuden.
You would be.
I want to be on Broadway.
You would be the only one that wants that. So
yeah, I know.
Let's do this. Let's do this again.
It's great, and we can talk about that for days.
Let's do this.
I love that, and that's a new area for me, the theater.
I know, and
musical theater.
So why don't we'll make an agreement that somewhere down the road we'll do another hour or more on more about TV. We didn't talk much about TV and theater, and we'll talk about those things totally.
Hey, can I get paid here?
Yes, you get paid with a great big attaboy and a great big thank you.
That's another thing. Writers, you're going to do a lot of stuff for free.
Yes, you are.
Free.
It's called spec.
I have a 50-year career, and I'm writing this musical for free.
You and me both. I've got two of them going right now. They're both for free. So
right, of course.
That's the way it works. So
okay.
Thank you, Norman,
so much.
Pleasure. I really appreciate it, and we'll talk soon. And we'll have you back, and we'll talk about theater and Johnny Dangerously the musical.
Okay.
That would be fun.
And you say hello to my friend Mary Rawson.
I will.
At Point Park.
I definitely will. Thank you, Norman.
Okay, bye-bye.
Have a great day. Today's StoryBeat tip. You must know and understand the genre that you intend your story to dwell within. This is critical to your success. Though most unforgettable movies adhere to the well-known storytelling form, each of the various genres has specific conventions that help audiences to instantly recognize such stories for what they are. Familiar genre tropes help shape the structure of a story. Knowing such conventions will allow you to alter or break them in a way that will make sense to viewers. I encourage you to study many different genres. Why? As audiences become habituated to certain kinds of stories, becoming bored with them, it will be to your advantage to freshen things up by cross-pollinating one genre with another. There are dozens of genres. Study as many different kinds of movies as you can, even if you are only interested in writing within a single genre. This is necessary today more than ever before because many producers want to play with audience expectations in order to take old tales to new levels. Combining genres is a useful way of refreshing storylines that have become all too familiar. Here's a great example. Star Wars is a sci-fi adventure that also liberally borrows from westerns, samurai stories, romance tales, fighter pilot movies, swashbucklers, and others. Star Wars taps into all of these genre conventions and more. Wise screenwriters know their story's genre well. Successful screenwriters are not afraid to manipulate the tried and true into something bold and new. Let genres inspire your stories. To learn genres well, watch a lot of movies. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you enjoyed this episode, please support us with a comment on whatever app or platform through which you're listening. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.